Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
Hello, my name is Norman Lucas. I am a British crime journalist and author, known for my work covering high-profile criminal cases and gangland figures. I worked as a crime correspondent for the Sunday Mirror newspaper and wrote several books on true crime subjects. As a crime reporter for the Sunday Mirror, I covered significant crime stories in Britain. I had cultivated sources and contacts within the criminal underworld. Undercover, I worked my way into the inner circle of the notorious Kray twins to gather information for my reporting. Through my books and newspaper reporting, I provided the public with detailed accounts of some of the most shocking and notable crimes in British history, helping to shape public understanding of true crime and its perpetrators. I hope you enjoy my story. London gangs were springing up all over the capital, with power being waged to decide which mob should control Soho. It was about this time that the Kray twins became recognized as ruthless and dangerous characters. They were, in fact, on the threshold of criminal enterprise that was, ultimately, to land them in the dock at the Old Bailey. Ronald and Reginald Kray had no scruples about carrying and using guns, knives, razors, and hatchets. My colleague, Lawrence Wilkinson, then Daily Mail crime reporter, refers in his book Behind the Face of Crime to a cutlass in the twins' armory and wrote, "One of the brothers, an ex-boxer with every symptom of punch drunkenness or psychopathic urge to violence, demonstrated to friends the effectiveness of the cutlass he was at that moment sharpening on an oil stone. He swished the blade through the air in an arc, his face contorted with venom and the anticipation of pleasure in combat. Another vicious swish, and then he said, 'Can't you see how that would stop them? Half a dozen blokes come at you, and then bingo, the first one gets his head cut clean off his shoulders and it rolls on the floor. Wouldn't that make them run?'" When sentencing Fret and Rosa, I discussed Fret and Rosa in the previous episode. Please refer back to it if you want the details again. Judge Donovan commented, "It sounds like the worst days of Prohibition in Chicago rather than London in 1956. The judge conceded that there were other and more wicked men behind the two accused and added that the tools of these people must realize that if discovered, their punishment will be condign." The police may well have believed that in view of the judge's warning to the underworld, the feuding would be called off for the time being. This assessment of the situation was, to say the least, optimistic. Far from an armed truce being recognized, yet another plot was being discussed, this time to involve Jack Spot in a frame-up which, if it succeeded, would put him away for a long time. The character chosen to pull off the coup was Victor Rousseau, who was born in Coatbridge in Lanarkshire. He was a relative of Alfred Dimes and once worked as an ice cream salesman and in a cafe owned by his mother. Later, as a member of a Glasgow gang, he suffered so many facial injuries that he became known among criminal fraternities as Scarface Jock. He had a record of 24 convictions and boasted that he had been knifed and shot twice, and on those occasions when his enemies had him on the floor, his jaw had been kicked in and an arm, shoulder, and leg broken. According to Rousseau, no love was lost between him and Billy Hill in the early days of their acquaintance. He claimed that he had fired a bullet Hill's way in a Soho night spot in 1942, and later had to deal with a quartet of Hill's henchmen who had been ordered to cut him up. Russo had a carving knife handy when the group caught up with him and laid about them so effectively that they retreated in bloody retreat. At a later stage, the breach with Hill was healed, and at the time of the Fraser-Warren trial, Russo was on duty outside the Old Bailey with Billy Hill and one of Hill's associates, Tommy Falco. Falco was employed by Dimes as a driver and took him to race meetings. Russo was walking along Frith Street one evening when he saw Hill in a car with Albert Dimes and another well-known racecourse figure and associate of Billy Hill, Francis Franny Daniels. At the wheel of the car was Johnny Rice, a tall ex-RAF physical training instructor and ex-boxer who was also connected with Hill's bookmaking ventures, although he always claimed to be a metal dealer trading under the name of J&J Spares from Evelyn Road, Richmond, Surrey. Rice's record was not formidable. He had been conditionally discharged for 12 months in 1950 after being found guilty of attempting to break into a post office and had only 3 other minor convictions against him. But he had been named by Rita Comer as one of her husband's attackers, but had not so far been arrested. I found Rice a very likable fellow, and oddly, despite the fact that he flitted in and out of the underworld scene like a moth, he was greatly interested in boys' clubs and was the vice president of Twickenham Amateur Football Club, whose players once said that he had been a fairy godfather to the team. As Russo drew level with the stationary car, he was called over and says that Hill told him that he wanted somebody to take a strike from Spot so that Jack could be arrested and jailed. Russo told Hill that he did not believe that such a plan would work because he was sure that Spot would not risk any further trouble with the police. Russo alleged that Hill then said he would give him £500 and pay the expenses for plastic surgery if he would let someone slash him and then accuse Spot of wounding him. Scarface Jock was more than reluctant, but finally agreed to take part in the plot, although he told Hill that he planned to return to Scotland shortly, and the attack would have to take place quickly. Hill undertook to arrange the incident 3 days later. On the morning fixed for the attack, Russo visited Hill and told him that he had changed his mind and would have nothing to do with the affair. Compelled to make alternative arrangements, Hill was alleged to have arranged for Johnny Rice and Tommy Falco to meet outside the Astor Club on June 19th, when Falco was to be slashed by Rice, and then claimed that Spot had been his assailant. Russo saw a newspaper report of the incident and the subsequent arrest of Spot, who protested that on the night of June 19th, he had never ventured outside his flat and said, "I will get 10 years for nothing." His alibi was firmly supported by his wife, Rita, but nevertheless he appeared at Bow Street Magistrates Court, where Falco, who had had 47 stitches put in a fearful wound to his arm, said that when Spot slashed him, the gang leader had commented, "This is one for Albert Dimes." Rice testified that he was leaving the Astor Club at 2:15 a.m. on June 19th. When he saw Spot wound Falco and had carried Falco into the club. Showing no fear of Billy Hill, Russo went to the police and told the story of his alleged Frith Street encounter with Hill and said that he was prepared to give evidence on Spot's behalf. He then went to Billy Hill and reported what he had done and advised Hill not to proceed with the faked-up case against Spot. Almost every facet of the incident had a peculiar twist. It was strange in view of his relationship with Dimes and Dimes's friendship with Billy Hill that Russo should have helped Hill's greatest enemy. After he had given evidence, Victor Durand, QC, who defended Spot, maintained that the accused had been framed and was entitled to an acquittal. Billy Hill went into the witness box and emphatically denied Russo's story, but his rebuttal of Rousseau's evidence was not accepted. Mr. Justice Streatfeild, who heard the extraordinary case, commented that it would have been strange indeed if Comer himself, within 4 or 5 days of seeing his attackers get 7 years imprisonment, had gone out and done exactly the same thing to another man. The judge then observed that there had been some people waiting in a car in Snow Hill who were very upset at the court's verdict in the Warren Fraser case. These people appeared to have their methods of dealing with those who had crossed them, and the case against Spot could have been the basis of a frame-up. Another fact which he mentioned as being in Comer's favor was that Comer's flat had been watched by the police because his wife was in danger since naming her husband's attackers, and on the night of the alleged wounding of Falco, he had not been seen leaving or returning to his home. Further, he thought it incredible that Comer could have known that Rice and Falco would be visiting the Astor Club on June 19th, or that they would be leaving at the time they actually departed. Spot was acquitted, and after the case, Hill complained that he was always being held to blame for any major crime that occurred. Yet again he emphasized that he had retired. Certainly there appears to have been no financial reason for Hill to continue his criminal career. Since the dramatic events of the Hill-Spot era, he has lived quietly and comfortably in London. Probably among his closer friends today is one of London's internationally known characters, Paddy Kennedy, licensee of the Star Tavern in Belgravia Mews, Belgravia. It is a unique venue in the capital which resounds to Paddy's Irish brogue. He numbers among his friends famous film and stage stars of the past and present, and is as well known at race meetings in the company of such personalities as Bing Crosby and Bob Hope, as Billy Hill was on the free side of the course. Billy remains part of the London scene, but what of Jack Spot Comer? He has been claimed by obscurity, but he left society a legacy, the Kray twins. For Spot was the man who, in the 50s, introduced Ronald, Reginald and Charlie Kray to the inner fringe of London's underworld when he used them to help him in the running of a billiards hall in the East Mile End Road. It has long been understood, especially in Britain and the United States, that poverty is the spur that goads the needy into crime. In America, this was never more clearly illustrated than during the years of Prohibition and the Great Depression, and similarly in this country, the immediate post-war years witnessed a sharp rise in law violation. Rationing still existed, and so too did the black market in food and other commodities. Nobody able to afford illegal extras asked any questions, but the poor could never pay the fancy prices demanded for the luxury of under-the-counter goods, and it was for this reason that many of them turned to crime after having lived honestly throughout their lives. Today, reasons other than poverty exist for rising crime statistics in a so-called affluent society. Unemployment allowances and the benefits available under the Social Security scheme ensure that nobody starves or goes barefoot. But state aid is no longer an insurance, if it ever was, against the temptation to live by robbery and violence. In an age of materialism, the modern crook looks for big returns that will put him on equal terms with the wealthy. Hunger and want no longer provide the spur. In their place is an appetite for luxury, fast cars and holidays abroad for his family or girlfriend. Law enforcement agencies realize that crime can never wholly be obliterated. The lone crook is invariably picked up sooner or later, and even the existence of small gangs can, to a large extent, be controlled. They often fight among themselves and ultimately cancel out each other. But the unexpected growth of a gang is a menace that can lead to such formidable organizations as those set up by the Richardsons and the Krays. In the 50s, when both these groups were bidding for control of many richly endowed rackets in the heart of London and its East End, a trio of events occurred involving encounters between much smaller fry than the Richardsons and Krays. The first involved a small-time crook who was described after his surprisingly lavish funeral as the underworld's Mr. Loser, Tommy Smithson. He was born in a dingy house in Hackney in 1920, a child who seldom saw the countryside, and for whom a holiday on the coast was a pleasure reserved for those who were rich. Tommy was one of many underprivileged London children who virtually lived in the wretched streets in the neighborhood, stealing whenever they recognized an opportunity and always ready for a fight among themselves. When he left school, Smithson joined the Merchant Navy. Anything, he must have felt, was better than could be found in the grey streets of his childhood, where he had known only poverty and deprivation. He was doing what many youngsters had done before him in trying to escape their destiny. Unfortunately, though, he lacked the resources to make his way in the world outside, and returned later to the very surroundings in which the seeds of his discontent and resentment against society had germinated. I have often asked crooks like Smithson why they never sought to sever their unhappy childhood ties forever. Invariably, I have received the same reply. I don't know, really. There's just something about the East End of London. You know, everybody knows everybody else. Families have been there for years and years. You kind of miss all that when you go somewhere strange. What of the drabness of the narrow streets, the old queues outside the labor exchanges, the frequent dock strikes? Without exception, the kids who ran barefoot in the streets, and are the men and women of today, say that they came to accept their destiny without rancor. Nevertheless, the East End has always been a great proving ground, and frequently those who have triumphed over their disadvantages have done so because they possessed inborn artistic gifts not given to others. In the world of the theatre and music, it is significant that the majority of young men and women who have succeeded in this way have come from poor but respectable Jewish families. When Smithson left the Merchant Navy, he returned to the East End to find that during his absence many Maltese had moved in. They had arrived in the country as assisted immigrants, paying no more than £3 each towards the cost of their passage. Many had become labourers, cooks, porters and waiters, but others had established small backroom gambling clubs or lived off the immoral earnings of East End prostitutes. It was probably a combination of resentment towards these interlopers, his own inability to do any skilled type of work, and a vein of laziness that prompted Smithson to organize his own mini-protection racket among the Maltese. Smithson did not show his hand immediately, and, in the beginning, he got a job as croupier with a certain George Caruana, who had opened a number of gambling clubs, including premises in Batty Street, Stepney. Caruana also owned a large house in Carlton Vale, which he let off in one-room flatlets. Smithson, after seeing the amount of money that was pushed across the table every night, did not wait long to reveal to his employer what he had in mind. He simply demanded a share of the take, and got it. The Maltese club owners were anxious to avoid trouble, so Smithson's list of contributors swiftly grew, as did his bank balance. He realized that he, too, could make money from gambling dens, and later linked up with a big-time operator who financed him in setting up a one-room club in Maidenhead Passage off Berwick Market in Soho. Smithson's employer made it clear to the small-time East End thug that he was nothing more than a frontman who would, as the nominal owner, pay the fines or serve a prison sentence if the club was raided. In return for his services as owner, Smithson was to receive a shilling in the pound on dice games alone, and as this proved to be one of the most popular forms of gambling in the club, with 50 or 60 people playing each evening, he sometimes picked up as much as £100 a night. Additionally, Smithson supervised faro tables and racing games. The anticipated police raids took place, and finally, Smithson was forced to move the club to Darby Street. By this time, he was himself reasonably affluent and decided to employ his own front man. He told the owner of the premises in Darby Street that he wanted to rent accommodation for use as a club for authors, and having successfully negotiated a deal, he had a painted sign erected outside bearing the legend, "The Publishers Club." His activities did not fool the police. Shortly after opening the club, Smithson received a tip-off that it was to be raided, and he closed up and moved back to Berwick Street. His luck there also rapidly evaporated, and within weeks of reopening, he was raided, and on this occasion, he was unable to raise the money to pay the fine. He was committed to Brixton Prison and stayed there until a number of friends, who were also operating spielers, clubbed together and secured his release. After leaving Brixton, he moved to another address in Berwick Street and set himself up as a bookmaker. The small-time crook from the East End then made his first big blunder. He thought he was big enough to muscle in on the territories of the race gangs. He was seen with the girlfriend of a member of one of the gangs and found himself in the middle of a fight that ended with a Maltese losing half an ear. A few days later, he received a message that a well-known gambler wanted to talk to him to try to effect some sort of peace between him and a number of gangsters whom he had upset. The gambler arrived in a chauffeur-driven car to collect the small-time crook. Immediately, Smithson entered the car, his gun was taken from him, and then the gambler nonchalantly wound down a window and dropped his fat cigar onto the road. The action was a signal. 11 men disgorged from a van parked along the street. They dragged Smithson from the car, slashed his face, chest, legs, and arms with razors, and then tipped him over a wall into Regent's Park, leaving him there, as they believed, to die. But the blood-drenched crook was discovered and rushed to hospital, where 47 stitches were needed to pull his carved flesh together again, leaving his face permanently scarred. Smithson was no squealer, and the attack upon him was followed by one of those bewildering underworld gestures which villains make to their own kind. He was slipped £500 as a reward for his guts and silence, and he bought a share in a club in Old Compton Street. Smithson was a Walter Mitty. He dreamed of being a big shot and boasted that he was respected both by Billy Hill and Jack Spot. The well-padded shoulders of his jackets exaggerated his swagger. The underworld's £500 worth of recognition of his bravery. Could it be that the reason he had not squealed was because he feared gangland vengeance, bolstered his ego, and he really believed he was a big-time mobster in the tradition of the Chicago greats? Brash as ever, and with not the faintest chance of ever succeeding, Smithson opened yet another club for illegal gambling. Scarcely had the nap on the new baize-covered tables been disturbed than the police were once again inside. As they left, they padlocked the doors of the Spieler, and thus another Smithson venture proved stillborn. It took some swallowing, but finally Smithson realized that there was no future for him in clubland. He decided to become a fence and spread the word that he would handle any type of stolen property. At first there was a steady flow of business from reasonably successful thieves, but by 1956, one of his enemies had tipped the gangland bosses that he was acting as a police informer. Equipped with razors, a thug accompanied him one day on a call to collect a debt. Smithson emerged from yet another encounter minus the money he alleged he was owed, but plus facial wounds that required 22 stitches. What reputation he had established as a tough guy to be feared took a severe hammering, and he became something of a joke. He had very little money left, but thought that if he moved back to the East End, he could sufficiently scare small club owners and men living off the earnings of prostitutes to persuade them to pay protection money. Smithson was then living with a woman known as Fay Richardson. She was later to become Fay Sadler and the subject of newspaper stories, and at this particular time, She found herself in trouble on allegations that she had been forging checks. She was charged with the offenses and had been remanded in custody pending trial. Smithson toured the East and West End, contacting friends and acquaintances in an effort to raise money to pay for Faye's defense. The first person he called upon was George Caruana, the Maltese whom he had once worked for as a croupier. Caruana came up with £50, but Smithson was dissatisfied with the contribution. He felt that the Maltese should have given not less than £100. At midnight on June 13, 1956, Smithson and two friends, Walter Edward Downs, aged 30, a dealer of South Kensington, and Christopher John Thomas, also aged 30, a steel erector of Burton, went to a cafe in Berner Street, Stepney, where they saw Caruana with a man named Philip Elul, a 29-year-old Maltese. Elul, a small blonde man, had once been convicted of living on the immoral earnings of prostitutes, but he was popular among the East End villains with whom he associated, and even among the women from whom he took money. He had been living in London for 3 years and was attracted by the vice rackets, which he hoped one day would provide him with a fat living. He had first met Caruana when his fellow Maltese had given him occasional work in his clubs. Smithson told Caruana that he wanted more than the £50 the club owner had provided for Faye's fund, and using his head, butted Caruana in the face, knocking out a tooth. Downs and Thomas then produced flick knives, and Downs aimed a blow at Caruana, who put up his hands to protect his face. The club owner's fingers were cut. To prevent other people in the club from coming to the assistance of the two Maltese, Thomas pulled out a revolver. On Smithson's instructions, Caruana was taken to hospital by Thomas to have his fingers stitched. After receiving medical attention, Thomas took Caruana back to his club, where the Maltese produced a further £30 for Smithson. By that time, Caruana was a thoroughly frightened man and at no time made any complaint to the police. Smithson also threatened Elul with a knife and told him that he would be cut up if he did not start collecting for Faye. He provided Elul with a book and a pencil and told him that he was to record every contribution collected. Elul was as frightened of Smithson as was Caruana, and to safeguard himself, he began carrying a gun. We will continue the conversation on Tommy Smithson in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there.